Well, the battle for Atlantis got underway on Wednesday, but somebody forgot to tell Gonzaga.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, Gonzaga and Indiana both lost to unranked opponents on Wednesday to start the battle for Atlantis. Sets up a matchup between the two of them on Thanksgiving. We're going to give you a preview of that game, talk about our 5 keys to Gonzaga avoiding a second straight loss to close out the show. But we got to start talking about what happened, what we saw, what we did not see from Gonzaga on Wednesday against West Virginia. Gonzaga falls to the Mountaineers. 86-78 was the final score. This one was in overtime for the Zags. Again, they now face Indiana. That game will be at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time on Thursday, the less ideal time for the West Coast, really for everybody. I think it's unfortunate that this game is going to be at that time, but that's what you get when you don't win the game. You were favored by 14.5 points to win, according to FanDuel. And look, the story of this game was effectively that Gonzaga's defense was pretty good, but their offense, particularly their 2-point offense, was just horrendous. There's really not any other way to look at it. West Virginia deserves some credit. Javon Small had an incredible game. They hit shots when they needed to hit shots. They got offensive rebounds when they needed to get offensive rebounds. They had a game plan that they stuck to successfully that Gonzaga was unable to find ways to beat. They had those little ghost slip screens that were really effective, forcing Gonzaga to change their defense. They double teamed Graham Ike, which was very effective early in the game, and stuck with it and put together a quality win for themselves. But for Gonzaga, 7 of 21 from 3, which isn't bad, 33%. It's not great, but it's not terrible. They were better in the first half. They kind of had to throw up some threes in the second half, in particular, try to get back in the game, and didn't quite finish the game shooting as well. But Nolan Hickman was 3 of 7. He was one of the offensive highlights for Gonzaga in this game. Khalif Battle was 2 of 5. From distance. They were 19 of 22 from the free throw line. They continue to be an elite free throw shooting team, one of the best in the country. Ben Gregg was 7 of 8 from the free throw line, critical down the stretch for the Zags. We'll talk more about him in a second. Ryan Nembhard, 5 of 6. Graham Ike, 3 of 4 from the free throw line. But the problem was Gonzaga was 43% on 2-pointers. And even then, they were, until Braden Huff hit like 4 or 5 in a row down the stretch, this team was shooting sub 40% from 2 for most of the game. They were missing bunnies around the rim. They were missing mid-range jump shots that they shouldn't have been taken too early in the shot clock. They were getting offensive rebounds and then missing the putbacks. Like they were just missing way too many shots around the rim. An uncharacteristic thing from a team that historically has been really excellent at finishing around the rim. They struggled a little bit early in this season, but to struggle for that long in this game was just devastating, especially when they played good defense, especially in the first half, and really should have put themselves in a position to win this game. 20 assists for Gonzaga, but 13 turnovers. And it's really just the Ryan Nembhard effect here. 12 assists for him compared to just 1 turnover. Fantastic stuff from Ryan. He didn't score as well as the Zags needed him to score in this game, but 12 assists to 1 turnover continues to be fantastic for him. The entire rest of the team combined for 8 assists and 12 turnovers. We had Dusty Stromer seeming to lob a pass to Ben Gregg for no reason. That got taken away. We had Graham Ike struggling to pass the ball out of the double team on the block. Multiple completely unnecessary turnovers in both the first and the second half that ultimately, when you lose a game in overtime, you can point to any number of small mistakes early in the game that leads to a loss. And we had plenty of those from Gonzaga in this one. The main storyline, unfortunately, continues to be the lack of performance from the starting front court, and in particular, Graham Ike. At this point, there's no longer a we're just waiting for Graham to come around. It needs to happen. It needs to happen, and it hasn't happened yet. Not even close. I defended Graham early in the game because I thought he did a lot of good things in the first half of this game and was just kind of playing the kind of game where, outside of missing a few shots, he's played pretty well. That's what it looked like in the first half. And then he continued to miss shots in the second half. And at this point, I mean, he barely looks playable. 1 of 6 from the field in this game. 0 of 1 from 3. It was one of the first possession of the game. He was wide open. I actually don't mind him taking that 3-point shot, but 1 of 5 on 2-point attempts around the rim. Yeah, he got to the free throw line a couple of times, went 3 of 4 there, helped get there big in foul trouble early in the game, which I thought was a valuable thing that he brought to this team, but that can't be it. That cannot be it. Grabbed 4 rebounds, fine. 3 more rebounds than Braden Huff, but Braden Huff's impact was far more dramatic offensively and I think defensively close enough. Graham played decent defensively. He only picked up 1 foul. He didn't look terrible on the defensive end of the floor. He had a block. And I maintain that Graham is probably a better overall defensive player than Braden Huff. But the difference in what they're contributing to this team offensively, I mean, it's a crater now. It's not just a small gap. It's a crater. Graham is a non-factor offensively. And that has been the case for all but one half of basketball this season against San Diego State. We cannot wait any longer. Mark Few's not going to make a starting lineup change in Atlantis. I can almost guarantee you that. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I would be very surprised to see that happen. I'm also not necessarily an advocate of, Braden's playing better than Graham, so make the starting lineup change. That's not necessarily how I feel, and I'm not arguing that Braden's not playing better than Graham. He is. At this point, it is indisputable. But I think that there's more to it than that. Graham's ability to draw contact and get bigs in foul trouble might be more valuable in the starting lineup. A lot of Braden's effectiveness is because he comes off the bench and gives Gonzaga a different lineup. Few's got to make a decision on what is more valuable to this team. Ultimately, I care more about who finishes out games, especially close games, than who starts them. Braden played the last 10 minutes, 12 minutes of this game. That, to me, is a strong indication that Mark Few believes he is the more impactful player to have on the floor. And the fact that Braden scored 8 points in the last 2 minutes of this game was the only reason they didn't lose in regulation. I mean, I think it's clear that he is more impactful for this team right now, and Mark Few sees it, and I think that's going to continue to be the case. I think Ike is going to figure it out, but man, I thought it would happen sooner than this. It's been real frustrating to see a guy who was, coming into the season in All-American conversations look this bad to start the season. I don't know what's going on with him. It's not like he's taking bad shots. It's not like he's, trying to be a different player than he was last year, trying to be, more of a face-up player, more of a away from the rim. He's taking the same types of shots. He's getting the same type of position down low. He struggled against the double team this year, but that's not new. He struggled against the double team last year too. But this year, he's just not making the shots he normally makes. That's the only thing. And that's why it's so frustrating. And that's why I've been so unwilling to be super lean into Graham's not playing well, but Graham's bad now kind of thing, because it seemed like the only thing that was different was that he was just missing shots he normally makes. And that kind of stuff corrects itself, usually within the first couple of games. But now we have Graham effectively costing Gonzaga games because he's not playable because of how bad he is at finishing around the rim. I did not have this on my bingo card. Most of you didn't either. Is it going to correct itself? I have to think to some degree, yes. And we saw the dominant player that he can be against San Diego State, a good team. But man, it's frustrating not knowing what version of Graham you're going to get night in and night out, and having it more often than not this season be the version that cost them games rather than winning them games. Michael Ajayi wasn't great in this game either. I said the starting bigs were a disaster. Yes, mostly Graham, but Ajayi, he had 7 points and 3 boards, but he also had 2 turnovers. He had a pair of fouls, and he's just not really impacting the game. The amount of times that he got out-rebounded by West Virginia where they just jumped over him or just out-jumped him or out-hustled him for a ball, that's the skill set he brings to this team. You're starting power forward, a guy that Mark Few said is the best rebounding player he's ever seen in a Gonzaga uniform, grabbing 3 rebounds against an undersized West Virginia team is a freaking problem. But where is he? Why has he not been that guy? 17 and 10 last year. Yeah, his role is smaller this year. But at the beginning of the year, he came off the bench, played well. Ben Gregg was in the starting lineup, not playing well. They flip him. Now Michael Ajayi is not playing well as a starter. Ben Gregg's playing better off the bench. You need both those guys to play well. That's what you got. And that's my concern about making an early starting lineup change at the center position is sometimes guys are better suited for a specific role. I understand it at the power forward because we've seen Ben come off the bench and we know he's valuable in that role. So I can see why they'd make that switch, but it hasn't helped Michael one tiny bit. And that's going to need to change. The power forward position should be a huge area of strength for Gonzaga, and at this point in the season, it has not been. Braden, Huff, and Ben Gregg were the reason that this team even went into overtime. Huff was phenomenal, 19 points, 9 of 14 shooting. He only had a pair of rebounds and 1 assist. He had a turnover and 4 fouls, but played well enough on defense, played phenomenal on offense. I mean, Braden Huff might be the best player on this team. He's not the best defensive player on this team. I'm not sure he's even the best defensive center on this team. But again, the difference between him and Graham defensively right now is just not very big. And the difference offensively, he's the best offensive player on this team, and it's not close. He's the best scorer on this team. Khalif Battle just disappears for long stretches of games, just gone for halves, gone for 10, 15 straight minutes where you just don't even notice whether he's on the floor or not. That doesn't happen with Braden. He's about the only player on this team that doesn't happen for. Hickman disappears for long stretches. He was good in this game. I don't need to pick on him. He was one of the more productive players for Gonzaga, but you can't just have one player who's consistently effective offensively and not know where it's going to come from every other game, because eventually you're going to run into games like this where you spend the whole time trying to figure out who's got the hot hand, and by the time you figure it out, it's too late, even in a game where you played good defensively. You need more guys to be consistent offensively. Huge shout out to Braden for being that guy. But if nobody else is going to do it, he might need to play 30-plus minutes a night, because they just do not have enough consistent offensive firepower for a team that is built to have a lot more than this. Built to have a lot more than this. I'll give a shout out to Ben Gregg, too, before we move on and talk about this Indiana team. Gregg had 9 points, 6 boards, a steal, and a block. He did have 4 fouls. A couple of them were real ticky-tack, I thought, but I can't complain about the officiating being impacting the outcome of this game. There were some not great calls, but wasn't what caused Gonzaga to lose this one, that's for sure. Ben was only 1 of 4 in this game, but he was 7 of 8 from the free throw line. He almost, it looked like an open 3-point shot that would have been a really clutch 3 for Gonzaga. I was thinking, man, this would be a great time for Ben to knock down his first 3-pointer of the season. He hit nothing but backboard. I don't know what in the heck is going on with Ben Gregg's 3-point shooting this year, but if he doesn't have that, that's another problem for Gonzaga. Need to figure out where Ben's outside shooting is. Need to figure out where Graham's inside shooting is, because at this point, I mean, Gonzaga's only got 1 loss on the year, but they got a tough Indiana team, and we'll see where they end up after that. But, man, this was a wake-up call for this team to hopefully move forward, figure out what things they need to do a little bit differently, because for a team that has title aspirations, had aspirations of being the number 1 team in the AP poll, this was a pretty pitiful performance to start the battle for Atlantis. So speaking of pitiful performances, Louisville blasted Indiana. My goodness. Gonzaga did not get run out of the gym the way that the Hoosiers did. So Louisville advances. Indiana and Gonzaga will now face each other. We're going to see if Gonzaga can rebound and turn around and beat Umar Ballo and the Hoosiers. We're going to talk about what that team looked like in their game against Louisville and meet the rest of this team coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the college hoops action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Thursday evening, USC heads to St. Mary's in Moraga to take on the Gales. The Gales are 4.5-point favorites. Not sure how you feel about that game. I think USC is pretty good. I do think St. Mary's are going to win. I think they're going to win by more than 5, so I'm taking the Gales in that one. If you like those odds, if you don't like those odds, you think USC is pulling off the upset. Either way, visit FanDuel.com to join today. As a reminder, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving on to talk about the morning game of the battle for Atlantis between Louisville and Indiana. The Hoosiers, 14th in the country coming into the game, lose to an unranked Louisville team, and it wasn't even close. Final score was 89-61, and it was not even that close. Indiana got a 3-pointer with about 8 seconds left, then stole the pass from a walk-on player who was on the floor, took it from him, dribbled back to the 3-point line, hit another 3 as the clock expired. 6 points in the last 8 seconds. Really, this was basically an 89-55 game with a couple garbage time points by Indiana. Them finally showing the reality that, hey, you can actually shoot from behind this line and get 3 points, instead of shooting from just around the rim where you only get 2 points. That's Indiana's huge problem. Big shout out to Louisville. They absolutely destroyed Indiana in this game. A huge run in the second half, just buried the Hoosiers. On the first half for Indiana, only 3 players scored. Malik Renaud, their starting power forward, had 15. Umar Ballo, of course, we know Umar Ballo, he had 9. Mackenzie Mbako, their starting small forward, had 5. That was all of Indiana's first half points. I believe Miles Rice didn't score until like the 12-minute mark in the second half, and I think that was the first points for their starting backcourt. Indiana's guards have not been good at all this season. The Hoosiers had 23 turnovers in this game. 15 of them were steals by Louisville. Huge shout out to Chucky Hepburn, the starting point guard for Louisville. Wisconsin transfer, had 16 points, 10 assists, 7 steals. Was really hoping we'd see a triple-double where a player only got 1 rebound. That would have just been kind of fun to see in that game. Let's talk about the Hoosiers, though. Don't need to worry about Louisville. They are not who Gonzaga is going to play in this game. The Zags will take on a Indiana club that is 4-1 on the season. They have wins over South Carolina, UNC Greensboro, SIU Edwardsville, and Eastern Illinois. For reference to where those teams are at KenPom, South Carolina is 82nd, but looks like one of the weakest power conference teams in the country. UNC Greensboro is 157th. SIU Edwardsville is 266th. And Eastern Illinois, one of the 30 worst teams in the country, 338th. For a while, Indiana had one of the worst non-conference schedules in the entire country. The South Carolina game helped their schedule just a little bit. And then playing really their first good team of the year. I think Louisville is good and South Carolina is bad. The line between good and bad is somewhere between those two teams in my mind. And they got exposed badly in this game. They went from 38th. They originally dropped to 58th right after the game at KenPom. They're now 59th as I'm recording this. The reason that I mentioned that is because initially, right when the game was over, Indiana and Louisville flipped. Louisville went from 58 to 38. Indiana went from 38 to 58 again. Now they are down to 59. Offensive efficiency is 69th in the country. Defensively, 51st. Tempo is 87th. This is a weirdly constructed Indiana roster. They have no floor spacing. They have very little outside shooting. Luke Goody, a transfer from Illinois, is kind of their only real three-point specialist. Mackenzie Mbako, their starting sophomore forward, he's a good three-point shooter, but really at the end of the day, this team doesn't shoot them. They don't shoot threes. I believe it was Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated posted this on social media that they are like top in the country or near the top in the country in two-point attempts that aren't at the rim. Non-bunnies that are two-point attempts. Basically, the least analytically beneficial shot in college basketball, in all of basketball, mid-range jumpers, long two-pointers. That's what Indiana does. They do a lot of those, and it doesn't work for them. It does not work for them. Again, early in this game against Louisville, who doesn't have a lot of size, Indiana just pounded the ball to Umar Ballo. Every possession, get the ball to Ballo, get the ball to Ballo, get the ball to Ballo, and it worked. It worked, and then they couldn't do it anymore because Louisville kept stealing the ball from them. Indiana could not. Their ball handlers were just all out of sorts, out of whack, getting rid of the basketball. So they started settling for long twos. They started settling for turnaround, step back jump shots. Just brick after brick after brick. Louisville got out to a big lead. Indiana couldn't come back in the game because they can't shoot threes. If you don't shoot threes, it's hard to get back into games when you're down by 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 or 25, which is what ended up happening in the second half. Lots of familiar faces for Indiana. We mentioned Umar Ballo, of course, started his college basketball career at Gonzaga, spent the last 3 years at Arizona, is now at Indiana. With the Hoosiers having a strong season, he's a very good shot blocker, a good rebounder, not particularly mobile, not particularly good away from the rim, but he can score around the basket. He can defend around the rim as well. Those are two areas he is quite strong. Malik Renaud is a phenomenal player as the power forward for them. Kind of expecting a bit of a breakout season for him. We've seen it in spurts, but it's not quite been there all the way. Kenan Carlisle, a transfer from Stanford. Miles Rice, the likely more familiar name to Gonzaga fans, a transfer from Washington State. Neither of them have looked as good as Indiana was hoping they would be after spending lots and lots of money to bring them in via the transfer portal. And then I mentioned Mbako. He, to me, is a big matchup issue for Gonzaga. He's a 6'9" 3. And again, this team plays Ballo at the 5, Renaud at the 4, and Mbako at the 3. So I'm very curious how Gonzaga is going to defend him. I think it'll probably be Khalif Battle on him, but Battle's been a bit foul prone. And I think the last thing you want in this game is Khalif Battle going to the bench early with foul trouble. So that's an interesting wrinkle in this game. You could put Ajayi on him, but then you have to put Battle or one of the guards on Renault, who is, I think he's like 6'8", 6'9" himself, but he plays the 4. So I think there's a possibility maybe we see some different lineup combinations from Gonzaga in this one. Maybe we see Michael Ajayi and Ben Gregg play together, which hasn't happened yet this year. Maybe we see the two bigs play together. Indiana's a team that has enough size that Gonzaga could struggle with them because of that. Now, Louisville didn't have that much size, and they managed to make it work. So I think there's ways around it, but I'm interested to see how Gonzaga handles that. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more because the Zags, they don't have time to wallow. Less than 24 hours after this game ends, they got to go take on Indiana. They really don't want to be in that losers bracket for much longer. They want to be in that third place game if they can. So we'll we'll talk about what Gonzaga needs to do to beat Indiana to get themselves in a position to play a better team in that championship game, or in that last game, I should say. No longer going to be in that championship game, unfortunately. But we're going to discuss our 5 keys to a victory for Gonzaga against Indiana coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're moving on, continuing to talk about Gonzaga's matchup against Indiana, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time on Thursday, Thanksgiving, right in the middle of the day. Like I said, it feels like it's a punishment for West Coast fans, but again, Gonzaga could have been played in that early morning game, but was unable to get it done against the Mountaineers of West Virginia. So now we take a look at what Gonzaga needs to do to make sure they don't start this tournament out 0-2. Don't pull a UConn and be in the 7th place game when you desperately don't want to be in the 7th place game. Earlier I said 3rd place game. Gonzaga's best shot here is the 5th place game, by the way. So for the Zags, we don't want to be in the 7th place game. Got to find a way to beat Indiana. Got to find a way to put yourself in a position where you're not in that last place game playing Davidson and not getting the quality strength of schedule that you want out of this tournament. So here's what they need to do to beat Indiana. Number 1, you got to shoot it well from beyond the arc. Indiana struggles to defend the 3-point line. They struggled to defend Louisville's quick ball movement, a lot of actions, pin downs, things like that to get open players from 3. They did not defend that well. Louisville, Pat Kelsey, they run an offense where they get a lot of those open looks. Gonzaga, that's not typically what they do. They love to pound the ball down in the block. I think that's going to be a challenge, A, because Graham Ike has not looked remotely like himself this year, and B, because Umar Ballo is probably the best defensive big that they have faced yet this season. So I think for the Zags, a big priority is how can we get open looks from beyond the arc? The other thing is that Indiana, they don't take them themselves. So if you build a lead by hitting open threes, they're going to have a harder time getting back in the game. And then last, you want to bring the bigs away from the rim. Umar Ballo does not defend well in space. If you can get him away from the basket, you get yourself some open looks from threes, or you create some driving lanes for somebody like Khalif Battle or Ryan Nembhard or Nolan Hickman to get towards the rim without having to try to get a shot up over the 7-foot Umar Ballo. The best player in terms of being able to pull Ballo away from the rim is going to be Braden Huff. Braden Huff, the pick and pop game with him has been there this year. We've seen him knock down open threes. He's a threat to shoot them. So even if he doesn't make a bunch of them, I don't want him, taking 5 of them if he hasn't made any or anything like that. But the fact that he is a threat to shoot them, that alone should move Ballo away from the rim. Indiana is probably going to let Graham Ike shoot threes. And I don't think they're going to let Braden Huff shoot threes. If they do, if Ballo just plays super intense drop coverage and leaves Braden wide open, shoot him, knock him down. Go 2 of 5 from 3 and force them to either change their defense, pull Ballo out of the game, or just let you keep taking them, in which case you keep taking them. To me, that feels like a big key in this game is not only knocking down the threes from the guards, but doing enough to get Ballo and Renault away from the rim with Braden Huff, with Ben Gregg, with Michael Ajayi, particularly Huff and Ajayi, the way they've been shooting the rock this year. Key number 2, force Indiana to take tough shots. This team doesn't want to shoot a lot of threes. They're not built to, they might be more built to shoot threes, but Mike Woodson does not want to do it. He doesn't want to do it. So great. If they don't want to shoot threes, make them shoot tough 2s. Louisville was very effective at not letting them get the ball in the paint after the first 5 minutes of the game. Gonzaga, I think, is going to be effective at that as well. They've traditionally been pretty good at not letting post players just establish position, get the ball on the rock, make a move and score. Gonzaga doesn't allow that very often. They struggle more defensively defending around the perimeter, which I think is actually an advantage for Gonzaga in this game because their ability to defend around the rim as opposed to defend out on the perimeter kind of matches up well with Indiana's skill set. Oumar Ballo is going to get some touches. He's going to try to get Graham in foul trouble or Braden in foul trouble. If he gets the ball in position to score, it's going to be hard for Gonzaga to stop him. They don't have a Chet Holmgren. They don't have those kind of defensive stalwarts down on the block to slow guys down like Ballo. He's not the most efficient scorer around the rim, but he's good enough at it and got enough size that he's going to be able to do it. But if you prevent him from getting the ball, make this team settle for deep twos, make them settle for mid-range jumpers. This is kind of how we saw Gonzaga be effective in a lot of their other games this year. Really, San Diego State, big part of it. Every shot San Diego State took was a contested two. It felt like that was all they could get in that game, and that was a big reason Gonzaga was able to win that one, was just forcing them into ugly shots. You do that to Indiana, they're going to take them, and they're not going to make them at a big enough clip to come back, especially if you are executing key number one, making those your own shots from three. If you're executing that well and you're forcing them into tough shots, you're going to be in a nice position to win this one. Key number three, it's always a key in every game, but especially after it not being a particularly effective area for Gonzaga against West Virginia, you got to take care of the ball. Got a little sloppy with the basketball against West Virginia, but again, Ryan Nembhard, 12 assists and 1 turnover. He was not part of the problem in that area. In Indiana, this is not a team that gets steals. They are 331st in the country at steal rate among all college basketball D1 programs. They do not generate steals. If you're Gonzaga, great. Don't find other ways to turn the ball over. None of those dribbling it off your foot or throwing a bad pass out of bounds or, dumb offensive fouls without the ball in your hands, like those kind of things. If you can limit those and you just have a game where you have 6 turnovers, 8 turnovers, maybe 5 turnovers, if you can, that's going to lead you to getting more shot attempts, more chances for offensive rebounds, more chances to get to the free throw line. It's going to prevent Indiana from getting easy buckets out in transition. It just sets yourself up. You set yourself up for a better opportunity to win this game on the glass, win this game around the rim, win this game with your outside shooting. Don't let this game be determined by coughing the ball up too many times and giving Indiana easy opportunities to score. Key number 4, let's let Khalif Battle cook. We have not seen Khalif Battle play a full basketball game for the Zags. He has had really hot 3 to 5 minute spurts. Very good at that. Did it against West Virginia, did it against Baylor, he's done it in pretty much every game where he has a little stretch of basketball where he scores 8 points, 10 points, 12 points in like 5 minutes. And then you look at the box score after the game and he finishes with 14 because he didn't do anything for the rest of the game. This would be a phenomenal game for Khalif Battle to just go out and score 25, 28, 32, things we know that he's capable of doing. This Indiana team is not great defensively. This Indiana team has players that would be really great to get him in foul trouble, like Oumar Ballo, like Malik Reneau. Ballo has been very good at avoiding foul trouble in his career. That's one of his greatest strengths as a front court player. But if you can lean into him, draw contact, get to the line, if you can just get Mbako to foul you on the perimeter, hand check you, things like that, get into their depth a little bit and let Khalif get hot. Get him the basketball, get him the ball in positions to score, let him shoot the 3 ball, let him attack off the dribble, especially if he can get to his right hand. Like, let Khalif cook. I think a lot of the disappearing acts for him are partly just Gonzaga's insistence on paint touches and getting the ball down on the block and prioritizing that over getting battle isolation opportunities, which I get. That shouldn't be your top option necessarily, but I think there needs to be more sets where we're trying to get Khalif Battle to score and get to the rim, because I think he's the most effective scoring player on this team outside of maybe Braden Huff. And in a game against good low post presence and good shot blockers, I'd like to see one of the other guards get going offensively, and the one most likely to win the Zags basketball game is Khalif Battle. Key number 5, you got to refocus. You blew it. You did not show up for a game against West Virginia. You were favored by 15 points. You never looked really comfortable in the game. You never built a very big lead. I think the closest they got was 10. You didn't do it. You didn't get it done. But you got less than 24 hours to wallow in it. You got to turn it around. Now you're playing a ranked team, the better of the 2 teams, according to Ken Palm before the game and everywhere else. Now you're playing a good team. The team you probably expected to play in that second round game is now who you're facing off with in the game where you're trying to avoid going 0-2 and putting yourself in a spot where the best you can finish is 7th. You got to focus. You can't wallow. You can't be too, feel too pitiful about yourself. You got to go out there. You can't be nervous, anxious, overly stressed. Oh, I haven't made a 3 yet this year. Oh, I haven't been playing well yet this year. You got to go out there and do it. If you're Graham Ike and you're getting looks around the rim, take them. Don't be afraid to shoot the shots that you normally make just because you haven't made them at the start of the year. If you're Ben Gregg, you got an open look from 3, take it. Just because you haven't made one yet this year, you cannot start getting afraid. Once you start getting fear and start worrying about your performance and, I haven't been able to do this well this year. Ben Gregg's on this team because he shot 38% the last 2 years from 3. You can't be afraid because you haven't made your first 9 on the season. Graham's on this team as an All-American because of how well he finished around the rim last year. I know he's been bad this year at it. Don't get me wrong. I know it. It is true. But the last thing we want is Graham Ike feeling like he can't take those shots, because if he's so scared that he can't shoot around the rim, then he becomes completely unplayable. Because at some point, the version of Graham Ike that we saw in the second half against San Diego State, he's going to come back. Be real great to have it against Indiana. But he doesn't get to be that version of Graham Ike if he's not willing to flush what's happened in the past. Be a goldfish, as Ted Lasso says. Forget about what happened in the past. Get ready to go attack him again on Thanksgiving in the morning against Indiana. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back tomorrow after Gonzaga's game against Indiana. We'll talk about how the game went. We'll get you ready for their final game in the battle for Atlantis. All coming up on a future episode of Locked On Zags. Thanks again for listening, folks. And as always, even after a loss, go Zags.